Tonight we will be looking at the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. And I'm going to start reading this story, starting in verse 1. It says, "A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, 'Lord, your dear friend is very sick.' But when Jesus heard about it, he said, 'Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this.' So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, 'Let's go back to Judea.' But his disciples objected. 'Rabbi,' they said, 'only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again?' Jesus replied, 'There are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world, but at night there is danger of stumbling because they have no light.' Then he said, 'Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up.' The disciples said, 'Lord, if he is sleeping, he will soon get better.' They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, 'Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him.' Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, 'Let's go too and die with Jesus.' When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died.' So for the next 2 weeks, we are going to talk about the story of Lazarus, which is about death and life. It's not life and death. We'll be mixing up the order. Specifically for tonight, we're going to talk about some difficult things. It's not going to be as happy as next week will be, but we're going to talk about what you need to do if God doesn't show up. We're going to talk about when you need God to show up, but he doesn't. These are times when you expect God to do something, but he doesn't. These are times when you ask God to do something, but he doesn't. And the thing that's different is I'm involving families. I would love for families to do this. Nothing better than at the middle of a busy week or a busier week, to just sit down, listen to me. Hopefully you don't fall asleep. And then if you want to partake in the devotional questions that will be provided, I have emailed them to parents. They're also in the description box, whether on YouTube or Facebook, however you're watching this. So you can feel free to answer these questions. But this story of Lazarus here in John chapter 11, like I said, this first part from the perspective of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus is a perspective of death. Now we will get to the second half, which is from Jesus' standpoint or viewpoint of life. We're going to talk about that next week. But I think we should honestly spend time in this sad, confusing, depressing, hard part of what's going on here in the beginning of John chapter 11. The story from the perspective of Jesus is nice and easy to handle, but I think we get quite a different picture if we really put ourselves in Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' viewpoint. So I want us to really wrestle with what it would be like for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus as they waited for Jesus in this story, and God kept them waiting. I think every single one of us watching this can say, I've had times when God didn't show up. I've had times when I've asked God to show up. I've had times when I've expected God to show up and he didn't. Think about how you would feel if someone is listening to your story and as you're telling kind of the hard times that you've gone through, they said, why don't you just hurry up and get to the happy part? If you're telling that story, you'd probably be a little annoyed because even though there probably is a happy part coming, you're still gonna not want to gloss over the struggle that you went through to get to that. Our times down in the valleys of life really deeply affect who we are and what we believe. So I want to be perfectly honest here. This first part of John chapter 11, Jesus doesn't come across as the nicest guy. At the very beginning of this story, Jesus received word that someone whom he loved was sick. And you may be thinking, well, of course it's someone that Jesus loved. Jesus loves everybody. However, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were personal friends of Jesus. They had spent time with Jesus before. And this wasn't like a regular request where some stranger that we've read, in these stories that Jesus has, that some stranger comes up and tells Jesus that, they heard that, he could perform miracles and they have faith in him and he's never met these people and they ask for a miracle and he grants it right away. No, these were friends who asked for help, but Jesus didn't immediately respond. He stayed where he was. Jesus literally has had countless strangers without any hesitation. He's healed them. But now a friend is needed, and Jesus decides not to go. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus knew that he had done these things for other people. Can you imagine how Mary, Martha, and Lazarus likely wondered if he would come? Why are they waiting for him to arrive? As each day went by, they likely wondered if he was going to come that day and probably questioned, why isn't he here? Why isn't he here yet? Maybe as each day passed, they got a little more frustrated, a little more angrier. So I want to take a minute to ask, because I think the first question I come up with, and probably you, is why didn't Jesus go? Why did he leave his friends hanging? If you consider these things from our natural human perspective, I think there are two reasons for why it would make sense that Jesus didn't go. First, maybe he didn't go because he was busy at the moment. It is Jesus. A lot of people were asking for healings. He was a very popular person at the time. Pretty much everybody knew the name of Jesus. He had a pretty full schedule. He was also, we're going to get to it here in a second, hiding out. Maybe he just couldn't schedule it. I don't know. That seems like a weak response because there's problems with that theory. You'd think, well, why didn't Jesus speak miracles from where he was like he's done before? In Mark 7, we read where Jesus said the word and a demon left a woman's child. And the child wasn't anywhere near Jesus. In John chapter 4, an official asked Jesus to come and heal his child, and Jesus said, "Go, your son will live," and he did. And then you have the centurion servant in Matthew 8 and Luke 7. Jesus is willing to go and heal a centurion servant, and the centurion said, "Jesus, you don't even need to come and do it in person. Just say the word, and I know a miracle will happen." And it did. So even if Jesus was busy, he probably could have ordered that Lazarus be healed right when the messenger informed him of the illness. He could have done that, but he didn't. So therefore, theory number one, of course, is kind of weak, and I don't think is what's happening. Secondly, perhaps Jesus didn't go because he knew that some people in Judea were trying to kill him. In order to protect his own life, because his time had not yet come to die, Maybe he needed to stay away from that area. The threat against Jesus' life was very real at that time. It says in this story, the reason why he's hiding out. We know that because when Jesus decides to go back, and we'll talk about this next week, then his disciples start questioning, like, is this really what you want to do? We just left. Jews were trying to kill you. That sounds like a pretty good reason to me, or at least a delay in going. But then we have problems with it again, because we come across in other stories in Luke 4 and John 10, the previous chapter. At those moments, Jesus is right in the middle of a confrontation, and we know that he passed through their midst or slipped away or escaped from their hands. So he has gotten out of dangerous situations. Basically, there isn't a good logical reason for why Jesus didn't show up immediately and heal Lazarus right when he was approached. Jesus left them waiting for days. However, when we get to verses 5 and 6 here, what we read in John 11, we find something that may completely shock you if it hasn't already. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. To me, what's shocking here is the word so. It says, so when he heard Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. I mean, this would make more sense if it said Jesus loved his family, but when he heard Lazarus was ill, or maybe if it would have said Jesus cared deeply for them, yet he needed to stay for 2 more days. Or maybe if it said Jesus loved Lazarus and his sisters, however, he waited 2 more days. But that's not what it says. The original Greek word here means so, therefore. Again, put yourselves in the place of Lazarus. Put yourselves in the place of Martha and Mary, who knew they had a friend who could make miracles happen with a single word from his lips. They sent for Jesus, they called out for Jesus, and yet because of his love for them, he waited. We need to seriously consider what that means. Because apparently there are times when Jesus, out of his love for us, does nothing. And I know that doesn't make sense. Hear me out. Jesus, as a result of his close friendship and his deep love for these 3 people, chose to wait. And by doing so, he chose to let their pain linger for a little while. In no other context does this make sense. I get it. It's like saying, out of the love for my parents, I don't visit. Out of the love for my wife, I don't celebrate her birthday. That's not true. I'm using this as an example. But Jesus, out of his all-consuming love for these 3 people who were very important in his life, stayed where he was. This is a major statement because we know that every single one of us are going to have times of doubt, struggle, grief, pain. You're going to have times where you cry out to God and he seems distant. And it's easy to say, if God seems distant, then maybe it's you who moved away and not him. Maybe that's true 99% of the time. However, according to John 11, sometimes you can have a relationship with Jesus. You can come to him with a need. You can come with him with a prayer request, and you're not going to get any response back. And it's not because of anything you have done, but because of his love for you means he does nothing for a time. Maybe it's because he's planning something bigger and greater for your life. But right now, it means you might be stuck waiting for him to show up. So for 2 days, Jesus does nothing to help his friends. Then he says, well, let's go and see how Lazarus is doing. Then we get to verse 17, and Jesus arrived to find that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, at this time in history, I don't know if you're very familiar with this. I didn't really know about this until I was doing some studying about this. But there was a popular belief that after death, at this time, the spirit and the soul of a person hovered around the body for 3 days, hoping to find a chance to re-enter the body. I know that sounds weird. That was just one of the beliefs around that time. And I'm not saying that's the belief right now. I'm just saying it could be a possibility. Now, we know this isn't actually what happens. It's not a true belief. The Bible actually says that when we're done with our earthly bodies, then we are at home with God in everlasting life. But even though it wasn't true, the idea of spirits hovering around bodies for 3 days was a belief that was common in that particular time. So, if this belief was even in the back of Mary and Martha's minds, you have to think that while Lazarus was sick, they might have been thinking, where is Jesus? Did he get our message? Why isn't he coming? And even after even after Lazarus died, maybe for 3 days there was this shred of hope that our brother's soul is hovering around, so if Jesus shows up, he can still make this miracle happen. And you need to understand something. Jesus didn't show up late here. He missed everything. He missed the sickness, he missed the death, he missed the funeral, he missed the burial, he missed the 3-day window where the soul was still trying to hover around, waiting for a miracle. At least that's what some people might have believed back then. But the picture here in verse 17 is not a picture where Jesus showed up fashionably late. He missed it altogether. And this didn't happen by accident. Jesus strategically showed up after all hope was lost for a miracle in Lazarus' life. Jesus planned to miss all this, and he showed up at a specific time. He showed up days later than when he was first asked to show up and do something. And while we think of our own struggles in our lives, we need to know that there may be times when God doesn't only let us suffer a bit longer and allow us to face those trials and those persecutions for the building up of our character, but sometimes he'll let things die. We all face times of, I don't see any hope. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes things struggle. Sometimes they suffer. Sometimes they die. Apparently, in all three, Jesus can still be present. And if things are going from bad to worse, from suffering to death in your life, God is still in control and still has a plan. 4 days Lazarus was in that tomb, with the grieving still very present. Jesus approached the sisters who called out for him days earlier when there was still a chance to not have to go through any pain or suffering. And for 4 days, or for days, they waited for him. For days, they longed for him to bring hope into their situation. And now when everything's hopeless, he shows up. And we know this story. Martha goes out to meet Jesus, and this is really where I want to end tonight. She went out and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And I was asked this once, and it stuck with me, so I want to ask it again to you guys. This is, again, to all families, parents, adults, teens, whoever's watching this. I want you to consider this. What are your if you had been here moments with God? Like, God, if you'd have been here, my family member wouldn't have died the way they did. Or, Lord, if you had been here, my friend would still be following you. Or, Lord, if you had been here, my parents wouldn't be splitting up. Or, Jesus, if you had been here, I could face these addictions. God, if you had been here, my family wouldn't be struggling the way they are. We might have been asking that a lot over the last year. But in the story of Lazarus, there are two stories to be told: a story about death, which we talked about tonight, and a story of life, which we're going to talk about next week. This week was the hard side. This week was the difficult one. This week is about the death in our lives. This is about those times when we are in such lost circumstances, difficult circumstances, where God feels like He's abandoned us. The times when we hear Christian cliches that drive me crazy, like, God will not let you go through anything He can't handle. And then you think, yeah, right. But like I said, this is the part that would be easier to gloss over and skip past. But I think if we do that, then we might have a shaky foundation of what happens when real life hits us, and hits us hard, and it hurts. Then we're going to have to come to grips with a God who may let us suffer, where He may let something in our life die. So while Lazarus was dying, Jesus waited. While the sisters called out for Him, He paused for 4 days, or for days. This is not a picture of just have faith in Jesus and life is easy. Honestly, I think this story, and there are probably other ones that are just as good of examples, but I think this is a great example of our relationship with God. This is a picture of valleys and chaos that life can throw at you. It is not going to be easy. But however, as we wrap up, let me suggest to you that we should be thankful that we have a God that we can come to, that can, with all of our Lord, have you been here moments. As we read, Jesus didn't punish Martha for her complaint. He actually listened to her. As I've told teens, both virtually and in person, God is not too big for your questions. God allows us to come to Him in our frustration, and then once we've laid all our cards on the table, God can speak. And I encourage you not to hide from those times. Don't run away. Don't cover up. Don't pretend like things aren't going bad. Face them. Grieve, suffer, struggle. Know that you don't have to pretend like you have it all together. God doesn't want you to put on a show. He doesn't want you to deny what's really going on. But even when circumstances cause us suffering, even when circumstances cause us to struggle, even when things about you or about us are dying, Jesus is still there. And He still has a plan. And so next week, I promise we'll get to the good news. But from Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' point of view, this story, like I said, is about death. But as we talk about next week from the perspective of Jesus, this is a story about life. So I hope that you participate in this family devotional together. Like I said, the family devotionals questions have been emailed to parents. They're also in the description box of the YouTube video below, or in the Facebook video, however you're watching this. So I really hope that you guys take advantage of this time to do this together. Send me a picture, text me a picture of you and your family doing this together. I would love to see it. It would be encouraging for me. Or just let me know how these questions might impact you for the week, and be thinking about them throughout the week, and really try to challenge yourself. So again, I thank you so much for participating in this with me. I hope this lesson wasn't too much of a downer. I promise next week will be a little more uplifting. But again, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week.